I think it's really, really important to think about, um, you know, why. Okay, well, you may know why you want to start a group. There's a couple things to consider before you do this. So one, identify your motivation, right? Um, Ideally, if you're going to start a group, you should be someone who cares deeply about other people with narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. I think that one's pretty straightforward. You need to make sure that you have the time, the energy, the patience, and what I would call the emotional capacity to do so. Okay. I think this is very, very important. Our goal here is to help set people up for success in starting groups, and we want to make sure that no one is knowing it is going into this, not having considered these things. Um, Success is not going to happen overnight, right? So you need to be able to commit to putting the time in to get a group up and running. Um, it will it will vary based on where you live, what time of year you start the group, um, whether obviously if you're meeting outside versus indoors, like anything outside is going to be affected by the weather, right? Um, and also like the location that you choose. I think the main point is here that it may take a while for you to figure out like what's the sweet spot of like finding people to join your group, where finding a place to meet, kind of like the logistics of it. But the most important thing is, are you in a good place to do this? Okay, really think about where you are in your journey. And then the last point there on, actually, I want to come back to the third point. Think about your personal strengths and challenges. This is starting a support group. It's a thing where you're going to have to be out there in front of people, extroverted. If you're an introvert, that might be a challenge. We all have different personalities, so think these things through. We want everyone to be set up for success. And the last point there, think about what you want to get out of it, and then also what you want the participants to get out of it. Because based on my experience, and I'm sure lots of other people's experience, you'll have the dynamics of a group are different every time. You'll have people come and go, just like we do at our virtual support groups. Um, just like my in-person group here in New York City, not everyone shows up, all at once at the same time. It's different every time. Okay, I think that's it for that slide. Next here.
So Keith, one of the things that I asked you when we first connected about doing a webinar like this, Keith, is it easy to start a support group? I imagine there are some challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, I would not say that it is. You might get lucky, but it's like anything. Like starting something from scratch is not easy. Um, you have to, if you think about it, it's like you have to. There's many different like things like to figure out. Like I said, like where do you meet? How often do you meet? How do you reach people? Right? You have to be able to market to people in some manner. So it's not super easy to get it going. You might start your group and have no one show up the first time. And they might not show up the first three times. Like, don't get discouraged. When I started my group, so for context, it's been in New York City here, it's been going for about 10 or 11 years now, minus a couple in the pandemic. The first few meetups, only a few people came. And then, so, no one came, I think, to the third or fourth one. And then, like, the next one, you just got to keep going and you'll get there eventually. Yeah.
Thank you. Sounds like you're a persistent kind of guy. So why, when you thought about why you should pursue it, what did you think about? Maybe that would help other people think about why each of you who are on the call would pursue taking on a peer-to-peer support group.
Sure. Great question. So I started the group because okay, I was diagnosed in 2005 and I moved to New York in 2010. So I started the group in 2014. So it had been like a good 9 years between diagnosis and starting this group. And I don't know, at some point I was like, I should probably meet some other people with narcolepsy. Like, I got I got a treatment that worked for me, got my diagnosis, which answered a lot of questions in my life. Got a treatment that worked for me. Was very lucky to get that like very quickly, right out of the gate. As we all know, a lot of people struggle with that, finding the right treatment. And yeah, I was like, there's got to be some other people with narcolepsy here in New York City because there's so many people. So I went looking for a group, and there was one at Montefiore. They have a narcolepsy institute in the Bronx, which is great, but it was during the week, all the way up in the Bronx, and that just didn't work for me. So I started my own group on meetup.com. And that's how I got into it. I'm not sure what expectations I had, other than I can tell you I thought everyone else was like me. I quickly learned that that was not the case.
That sounds like a good lesson. It's hard to, sometimes it's hard to self-assess when you're in the middle of it all. And I guess the next question is, do you have the patience and persistence to stick with it? What type of
Right.
patience, persistence did it take for you?
Well, like I said, at the start, it could be slow to get it started. Now, if you already have some folks you've met online and you're doing an in-person group and you're in the same area, maybe it'll be easier. Um, now we have the option of like, doing hybrid. Um, but I think the persistence part comes like really, it's important at the start. It can be like seasonal, like, and you might have to try things like we have done over the years, we've done picnics in the summer here. Then we switched it to the fall because it was too hot in the summer. Um, Now we have some awareness days like Suddenly Sleepy Saturday that we can tie World Narcolepsy Day that we can tie events around as support group organizers, which is great. But you might have to experiment, you know. And I think the patience part is, you as the group leader, you have to set the tone, and we'll get into this in a minute. You have to set the tone for the group, to set the vibe. It needs to be empathetic, and you're going to be listening a lot. As a support group leader, your job is not to really talk that much. Your job is to set up an environment for other people to share, and you have to facilitate the conversation. And sometimes that requires, patience, um, because you might have to, all support groups are usually timed. You might have to, keep people on time, etc. Keep the discussions going. But I think we have some more sort of tips on that part.
Thanks, Keith. When you went searching, did you look for people who could help you, or is that a question you thought, how can someone help me? Because I imagine people here, the reason, Chris, all of you are here is how do I do this? What support can I get? And Keith, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I did not look for anyone to help me because I did not know anyone else who had this disease. So that's an easy one. Now, if you know people that you've met and want to help you, even better. I mean, finding folks to help you out is really, really important. Um, so you could ask a friend, and maybe a friend who doesn't have narcolepsy or IH, if there's a way that they can help you get it started. Maybe a supporter, a family member, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a spouse, a partner, whoever. They could help you out in different ways, right? Maybe they're not going to sit with you there and, facilitate a conversation, but maybe they can help with like the outreach, like the marketing, if you will, getting people to find your group or something else. Um, so I think that's the answer there. But a couple other things I want to touch on here. I think, if you're starting a group, you have to think about it as it's sort of a form of public service, right? You're doing a good thing. You're putting a small dent in the world. And I think going back to something that was mentioned in the previous slide, what's in it for you? You're likely to make new friends and grow your network. You should get something out of it too. Um, if you, it it can be challenging sometimes to sort of be the absorber of a lot of information or emotions, you need to make sure that you are able to handle that and get something positive out of it as well. All
Thanks,
right,
Keith.
let's go.
That's great.
Okay. All right, building group resiliency. Okay, so we just talking about this. Running a support group can be a singular effort. I think it often can be at the start. Um, the Narcolepsy Network annual conference, we've been doing this for what, 38 years now. As the conference has gone around the country, we've helped start support groups in the cities where the conferences are held, which is great. That is just a pitch for the conference here, but coming to the conference is a great way to meet people. But it's important to, if you don't have a co-organizer at the start, I think it's often started by, one individual. That's fine. When people join the group, there's your opportunity to start, recruiting other folks to help you. Amy, did you want to say something there?
Yes, coming soon, you'll hear about the 2025 annual conference. So stay tuned, keep on our email list, and we're super excited to be back in person. So I hope who's ever on the call will consider joining us.
Yes, thank you, Amy. Okay, a couple other things. So why do you want to have a co-organizer? You might need some help. Um, you might have an issue like I did one day where I was due to have a support group in an hour, and one of my daughter, she was a baby at the time, we had some sort of emergency, and I couldn't go run the group, and I didn't have anybody else to back me up at that point. And I remember one person got upset because weren't able to have the group, and that was a tough spot to be in, right? So you need, it's always good, whenever you start something, it's always good to have people helping you. How do you find a co-organizer? I would say, look for potential leaders in your group, people who show up repeatedly and demonstrate a willingness to help. Um, and then you also have to make sure that your co-organizers, they're all aligned on sort of the mission and values of the group, right? If you don't have, it's like with any team, if you don't have a goal, like some sort of like mission, like what you're trying to do, people can take it in different directions. So make sure that you're aligned there. Yes, Amy.
So Keith, I have a question, which is really related to being a peer leader. Is what do you think the differences are between being a peer leader and being a facilitator of a group that's supporting people? I mean, there is something unique about being a peer leader. It's why we're doing this. I know this is not in this slide deck, but I think it's really important to address because of sort of the rationale behind it.
Peer leader versus like a facilitator who doesn't have the disease.
Right, like
Got it.
what
Well,
are
I
the
think you're gonna. Oh,
advantages, uh,
sorry.
the advantages that you have as a peer leader? I guess that's the question.
Sorry. Well, the advantage is you already feel the pain of having this disease, right? You're going to have some sense of what people need and are looking for. You might not know all of it. I mean, I did not. Like I said, I thought everyone else was like me when I started the group, and I quickly learned that there's a whole range of symptoms and experiences people have. I think that's my answer there. Okay. Let's so talk to support group members. Okay, so think of it like a mini business. Any business, you want to talk to your customers, right? Ask them what's working and what isn't. They'll tell you too. Like I get requests all the time. Can we have a support group in northern New Jersey or way out on Long Island? And I have to say no. We're focused on New York City. We hold it in Manhattan as a central location. So location could be something, like time of day, like what day, time of day, the frequency of meetings, the location. All of these are things that you're going to get the best turnout, if you understand what works and what doesn't. Listen for helpful suggestions, and that might also by talking to people and getting some feedback, like you could even like give them like a survey. like we often do after like conference sessions. You might find volunteers who will help you through that by engaging with them. Okay. Last thing I will say, building group resiliency around there's a couple different options now. Like I mentioned, we have in person, we have online, and then we have hybrid, where you can run a group in it's Raleigh, North Carolina. And you could also have you could alternate between virtual and in person. Um, and I'm not sure what else I want to say there about resiliency, but it
So,
could be it could be another way to engage and reach people. Go ahead, Amy.
so Keith, there is a difference between the in-person and online. And
Sure.
since you run some of our online and you do the in-person, can you sort of paint the picture of what the difference looks like?
Yeah, I mean it's a very, very different experience, right? If you have, let's say you have 30 people, like we've had 30 people in our virtual support group before. That's a lot of people, right? Only one person can talk at a time on Zoom. When you're in person, people can break into, they do what humans do. They break into small groups and have, discussions, different discussions. In person is a little bit more natural. Online is inherently a little just different, maybe slightly more awkward. It gets harder the more people you have, where you can only, if you have an hour and 20 people want to talk, but you can only accommodate 10, it is what it is. So it's different. They're both valuable. You can experiment.
Right.
All right, let's go on to the next slide here.
And so we
Amy.
have some simple tips for running a support group. And this, hopefully these can help you think through, just the basics, which is defining your role as a facilitator and a listener from the get-go when you start each group, because you may have each group session, you may have different people. And again, for each session, defining the rules of engagement. Do people raise their hand? Is it a free fall? Is it whoever speaks first? I've encountered that online, that if we don't have a process, the people who have the most to say will jump in. So it's important to think about that. Keith can probably speak about what cultivating trust, safety, and empathy is. Um, Keith, do you want to
Sure.
just think about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, as the support group leader, you really set the tone. Um, you know, trust, safety, empathy. I mean, here's an example. Like maybe someone shares an anecdote and you laugh at it and the person doesn't find it funny. You've created a situation where they don't feel safe, right? So you have to be very, very, very careful and really think through like how your actions are perceived by others so that everyone feels safe sharing openly. 'Cause that's like the power and the magic of support groups when you can share openly with others.
So I guess the fourth one feeds into that, respecting privacy and reminding others that there's to create the boundaries so people feel comfortable, and the trust that you're not going to share information. Uh, Making sure each person has the opportunity to speak, because there are some people who are less comfortable with that. Monitoring the group dynamics and see, does it change from week to week? I mean, month to month, or whatever the frequency is that you determine is going to work the best. And making sure to thank people at each time after they share. It means a lot when people are acknowledged, and to also thank them for attending. And it's a brave act to attend a support group.
Yeah, people will be afraid to come, right? Like for various reasons. You want to make them immediately feel like welcomed and heard. I think something Amy mentioned is really important. Be an active listener. Like that. If you as a support group leader are doing that, that will encourage other people to do the same. Versus if you're not paying attention, that again sets the tone. All right, let's go next slide here. Okay, how will I reach my audience? All right, this gets into like the sort of marketing light. So our Fluxy Network provides licenses through meetup.com and Zoom. to run groups in person and virtual, right? Or you can try the hybrid thing. One of the advantages of Meetup is that it has really good search engine optimization. So if I search for a support group in my local area and it's on Meetup, it's very easy for people to find. When I started my group here in New York, I didn't have to do any I didn't have to do any work really. People just started coming through Meetup. They have the advantage of like having the network effect of a lot of people on their platform. You can also use social media. You could reach out to local sleep centers and ask them, hey, or tell them, hey, I'm starting a support group. Could you help me? Do you have, I think a great way to approach it is like, is there any way that you could, help me connect with patients and see what they say? And then there may be other ways to reach folks as well, online now. Okay, next. All right. How do I set my expectations? I think this one is really, really important. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this here because we're going to have a discussion. But think about the area in which you live. Okay. Um, and I'll give you an example here of how I did it for New York. If you live in a rural area versus a big city, you are going to have fewer people at your group. You have to think about um, so I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a tool called Big Radius, which will tell you how many people live within like basically like a circle of where you are, and you can say, I want to know how many people live within 10 miles of me or 100 miles of me. That is a really great way to understand how many people in your area you could serve. Then you just have to do some basic math, right? For narcolepsy, about 1 out of every 2,000 people have narcolepsy. So, um, and then, 25 to maybe a third of them, 25 to 33% have been diagnosed, right? So you can start to do the math and figure out how many people you can realistically serve. So here's an example in New York. So there are 8.5 million people within the city limits, right? So I multiplied by 0.0005, that's 1 out of every 2,000. That comes out with 4,200 people. If only a quarter of them are diagnosed, I've actually only got maybe over 1,000 people that the group could serve, right? So that is, I think, it's really, really important to do. If you're in a town of 50, there's going to be very few people with narcolepsy or IH, right? So again, you have to think about like where you're hosting the group. Are people going to drive to it? Are they going to take public transportation, etc.? The reason that I think that this is important, and Amy, hold on one sec, is that you want to set yourself up for success and not be disappointed, right? Go ahead, Amy.
So this is only for in person. It's
For
not
in
for,
person, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I think one of the things to really think about is in an in-person setting, or if in a local area you're able to go grab coffee or have social experiences. Zoom, you're not. So it's a different, I'm going to say it's a different animal, but it really is different. And so this marketing piece and setting expectations is really applicable to in-person and local groups. Even if you did it locally on Zoom, you'd still have the ability to connect in person, which we've learned over time that's a super meaningful thing for people with IH and narcolepsy.
yeah. All right, thanks, Amy. Okay. All right. So, like I mentioned, Narcolepsy Network provides licenses for Zoom and Meetup. If you're interested, you can email info@narcolepsynetwork.org to get more info. That's our catch-all email. You can always email info with any questions that you have. And then we have a map on our website under resources and support groups. And we try to keep this as up to date as we can this includes groups that are on Meetup, that we're supporting, as well as other support groups throughout the country that we know about.
So we encourage people who start groups to let us know about it so we can post it, because every week we have a weekly newsletter We share information on support groups, the one that we do online as well as the ones that are across the country.